Long before Japan kept written records, its people carried the divine in the form of spoken stories. Tales of kami, those sacred spirits who inhabited the mountains, the rivers, the sea, and the fields. Most of them acted. Most of them moved. They shaped the land, fought battles, and commanded the forces of nature. But one kami did none of those things. He never traveled. He never fought. He never took a single step. And yet, he knew everything. This is the story of Kuebiko. If this is your first time here, welcome, and please consider subscribing and following the channel. Your support is what makes it possible to keep bringing these ancient stories to life. Now let us step into the Age of the Gods. Ancient Japan had no single sacred text handed down from the very beginning. For generations, the stories of the kami, their origins, their relationships, their great deeds and failures, existed in oral tradition, passed between communities, preserved in ritual, and carried forward by those whose duty it was to remember. That changed in the early 8th century of the Common Era, when the Imperial Court of Japan undertook a massive project of collection and record. The result was the Kojiki, a title that translated into English means the Record of Ancient Matters. This document was compiled by a court scholar named Ono Yasumaro, working at the direct command of Empress Genmei. The Kojiki was completed in the year 712 CE, making it the oldest surviving chronicle of Japanese history and mythology. The Kojiki was not simply a work of history. It was a record of the divine, a carefully arranged account of how the world came into being, how the kami were born and lived and died and were reborn, and how Japan itself was shaped through their actions. Its first book, known in Japanese as the Kami-tsumaki, or the Upper Roll, dealt entirely with the Age of the Gods, that primordial era when the kami were still at work, and the world still had the texture of myth. It is within this first book, within the Age of the Gods, that Kuebiko appeared. Even the name Kuebiko told part of his story. Its second element, hiko, meaning young man or prince, was a term that ran consistently through the names of male kami across the Kojiki, a clear and deliberate marker of masculine divine identity. Kuebiko carried it without ambiguity. He was a male deity. But the first element of his name, Kue, or in some readings Kue, held something more specific. Scholars of Japanese linguistics and mythology noted that this element may have referred to brokenness or inability, particularly in the legs or lower body. If that interpretation was correct, then Kuebiko's name was not merely a title. It was a description, a divine signature that announced, before anything else was said about him, that this was a being who could not walk, and was rooted to a single spot as firmly as a stake buried in the earth. Kuebiko was recognized in Shinto tradition as a kami of knowledge and wisdom, and also as a kami of agriculture. These two domains, the intellectual and the agricultural, were not as separate in ancient Japanese thought as they might appear to a modern person. The knowledge of the fields, of the seasons, of when to plant and when to harvest, of what forces watched over the rice paddies and what forces threatened them, was itself a form of sacred wisdom. Kuebiko held both. The Kojiki offered no birth story for Kuebiko. No passage described the circumstances of his creation. He simply appeared in the narrative, already omniscient, already present as an established fact of the Age of the Gods. However, Kuebiko himself claimed descent from Kami Musubi, one of the most ancient and foundational of the creator deities. It was a connection that placed him within the oldest layer of creation, even if the story of how he came to be was never told. His immobility placed no limit whatsoever on the reach of his knowledge. This paradox, absolute physical limitation paired with absolute mental omniscience, was the essence of Kuebiko's divine identity. It set him apart from almost every other kami in the Shinto tradition, and it gave him a role in mythology that was unlike anything a warrior deity or a nature deity could fill. The episode in which Kuebiko appeared in the Kojiki took place during one of the central narratives of Japan's Age of the Gods, the great work of Kunitsukuri, meaning the making of the land. This was the process by which the earthly kami shaped and developed Japan, organizing its territories, establishing its divine governance, and laying the spiritual foundations of what would become Japanese civilization. The chief figure in this work was Okuninushi, also known as Onamuchi, the great master of the land. One day, while standing by the sea, he saw a tiny deity riding the waves ashore. The account in the Kojiki described this being as tiny, diminutive, in a way that set it apart from the assembled kami who watched its arrival. The small deity wore a garment fashioned from the feathers of wrens, and had the appearance of something both otherworldly and purposeful. Okuninushi and the other kami present watched this figure arrive. Despite their divine status and great wisdom, none of the assembled kami recognized the small figure. Then one deity suggested that they consult Kuebiko. The passage in the Kojiki in which Kuebiko responded to the inquiry about the small deity's identity contained the declaration that became the most famous expression of his character in all of Japanese mythology. When Kuebiko was asked who the small deity was, he answered in terms that addressed both his limitation and his power simultaneously. As recorded in the Kojiki, Kuebiko stated that though he could not walk anywhere, he knew every matter under heaven. That was his declaration. Immobility acknowledged, omniscience asserted, and then, without further elaboration, he provided the answer. The small deity, Kuebiko told Okuninushi, was Sukunabikona no Kami. He further identified Sukunabikona as the child of Kami Musubi no Kami. Armed with the knowledge of who Sukunabikona was, Okuninushi was able to receive him not as an anonymous mystery, but as a named and recognized kami with a divine parentage. Okuninushi consulted Kami Musubi no Kami about Sukunabikona, and it was confirmed that this tiny deity was indeed a child of that creator kami, a figure of genuine divine importance, sent to assist in the work of building the land. From that point, Okuninushi and Sukunabikona worked together as partners in the great project of Kunitsukuri. Together, the Kojiki recorded, they developed the land, brought forth the principles of medicine for both humans and animals, established the means to ward off evil, and laid many of the foundations upon which Japanese civilization and spiritual life would be built. Kuebiko contributed none of this directly. He did not speak to Sukunabikona. He did not participate in the land building in any active physical sense. But without his knowledge, Sukunabikona would have arrived unrecognized, and the partnership might never have formed in the way it did. The consequences of Kuebiko's information rippled outward far beyond the moment of the consultation itself. This was the nature of his role, not to act, but to know, and through knowing, to enable the actions of others. No discussion of Kuebiko could be complete without a full examination of his connection to the scarecrow. The Japanese word for scarecrow was kakashi, and the scarecrow held a position in ancient Japanese rural life that went well beyond its practical function. Scarecrows were not merely tools to frighten birds. They were understood in the spiritual landscape of ancient Japan as presences, beings that watched over the fields, that stood in the midst of the growing rice through every season, that remained when everyone else had gone home. It stood fixed in place, planted in the earth, unable to move from the spot where it had been positioned. And yet it watched. Nothing that happened in the field escaped its gaze, at least in the spiritual imagination. This was exactly the nature of Kuebiko. He too was fixed in place, unable to move, rooted to his position. And he too watched, or rather knew, everything that happened in the world. The scarecrow standing in the field and the divine kami of omniscient knowledge were reflections of the same essential image, the immobile watcher who misses nothing. When the full picture of Kuebiko's mythology was assembled, his paradoxical nature, his role in the Sukunabikona episode, his connection to the scarecrow, his powers and limitations, his agricultural veneration, what emerged was something philosophically coherent and distinctive. Kuebiko represented the principle that knowledge was itself a form of divine power, and that this power did not require physical strength, mobility, or direct action to be real and significant. In a mythological tradition that contained many kami of extraordinary physical capability, of divine warfare and elemental force, Kuebiko stood as a counterpoint, a deity whose gift was purely of the mind, and who demonstrated through his mythology that this kind of gift was indispensable. And with that, we reach the end of today's journey through the mythology of Kuebiko, the immovable kami of ancient Japan, who could not take a single step, and yet knew everything that occurred beneath the sky. If this episode has added something to your understanding of Japanese mythology, we would truly appreciate it if you shared it with someone who loves history, ancient religion, or the stories that shaped civilizations. Every share helps this channel reach those who are looking for this kind of content. And if you are not yet part of the community, please subscribe and follow. It means a great deal to the work we do here. Thank you for listening. We will see you in the next episode.